Welcome to my introduction to Richard Powers' majestic and lengthy novel, The Overstory. Again, I understand, given the circumstances and situation, that everyone may not get to complete the entire novel, but I want all of us to engage it in whatever way we can, read as much as we can, and reflect upon it in any way that we can. Before the narrative starts proper, the novel asks us to think about the materiality of trees. As you'll soon discover, this is a book that makes us think deeply about our own dependence, our fundamental dependency on the network of trees that sustain life throughout the earth. And on the very first page, again, this is before the table of contents, you'll see a dedication page for Ida. And underneath, I think this portion is so important. The Overstory is printed on 100% recycled paper. By using recycled paper in place of paper made with 100% virgin fiber, the paperback first printing has saved 637 trees, 614,962 gallons of water, 206,700 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions, 62,925 pounds of solid waste. Totals quantified using the eco calculator at, and there's the email address. So from the onset, this book is asking us to think about the materiality of paper and the materiality of the environmental world. How often have all of us picked up a book and not thought about how was this book made possible? How many trees had to be cut down to enable me to hold this book in my hand? How much water was needed to grow that tree? So what this introduction is making us think about is that the timber industry, the book industry, is usually predicated on cutting down um, virgin fiber, right? New trees rather than recycled paper. So this book wants us to think about recycling, about a cyclical relationship to nature, one in which there is no waste, but rather everything is reused. Because the system we have right now, including the dominant system of reading, is predicated on an extraordinary amount of waste. Just think about these numbers. For the first printing of this one book alone, and granted it's a big book, but how many books are published every day, every month, every year? This book alone would have required 614,962 gallons of water for each of us to hold this book in our hand. But by committing to recycling, to think about our own relation to and responsibility in the web of life, we could commit to a different world order, a different economy, a different ethics, a different politics. And these are going to be the stories, these are going to be some of the themes explored over the course of this novel. If you look at the contents of this book, you'll see that it's organized into four parts. It begins with roots, and under roots, you'll see 8 different names, really 9 different names. Starts at roots, moves to the trunk, moves to the crown, and the book concludes with a section entitled Seeds. The way this book is organized is that it uses the tree as a principle of organization. So we begin with the roots of the tree. And what's interesting within the section of roots, we're introduced to the central characters. And initially, the 8 or 9 central characters, it's really 8 different sections, but there's a husband and wife, Kay Brinkman and Dorothy Kazali. So let's say 9 characters. But each of these characters seems independent or isolated. Initially in the section Roots, it seems like short stories that are unconnected, that reflect our condition of alienation, of being alone. But as this book moves into the second section, Trunk, what appeared to be individual stories begin to become connected and intertwined until finally we get to the section Seeds. And I don't want to ruin anything, but the book keeps on changing forms as it's thinking more along the organization of a tree. And as you'll learn as you continue to read this book, trees are not isolated beings. Rather, they exist in a network. And in fact, as scientists have fairly recently discovered, trees have their own language and communicate with each other. So the organization of this book is inspired by nature and moves in some really powerful directions. The first two pages that begins with first there was nothing, then there was everything, are perhaps the most philosophically dense pages of the entire novel, and not necessarily representative of what's to come. By the time we get to the story of Nicholas Hole, the story becomes much more rooted in character, but still thinking deeply about ecology and environmental issues. I want to briefly go over, though, some of the key ideas broached in these first two pages, beginning with the opening line, and you'll notice it's in italics slightly, setting it apart from the rest of the novel. First there was nothing, then there was everything. In a way, this first line echoes Genesis, the first book of the Bible, right? But it also, I think, makes us think about language and the inadequacy of language. In this opening section, I want to suggest, is all about making us think about our language and the inadequacy of human language to grasp the complexity and diversity of the natural world. First there was nothing, then there was everything. Think about how miraculous that was. That there was a time when there was no life on earth. But the way this first line is constructed, syntactically, the miracle of life, the diversity of life, unfolds between these two sentences. First there was nothing, then there was everything. All of our attempts to narrate, to give form to represent, fail. How can our language begin to represent, begin to grasp the plurality and miracle of life? If we skip down a little bit, we see the line, the tree is saying things in words before words. And here we can highlight how this first two pages is about language. And perhaps the most revolutionary thing to grasp, and again, it's not so revolutionary if you study the natural world, is that humans are not exceptional in having language. All living creatures and beings have their own form of language. And as this book is going to impress upon us, trees have language too. Trees can speak as well. The tree is saying things in words before words. Trees speak, but just not in our language. But as this book is going to ask, and again, I hope you have the chance, maybe not, by the end of the semester, but eventually have a chance to finish this book, because it is a long book, and I recognize that everyone's going to be able to finish it. The book is going to suggest, can we learn to hear? Can we learn to listen and understand trees? However imperfectly, however flawed. It says, and here we see Richard Powers beginning to assume the perspective of a tree, trying to speak from the perspective, trying to understand from the perspective of a tree. It says, sun and water are questions endlessly worth answering. It says, every piece of earth needs a new way to grip it. Let's try that last part again. So again, Powers is speaking or attempting to speak from the perspective of trees. It says, sun and water are questions endlessly worth answering. It says, a good answer must be reinvented many times from scratch. It says, every piece of earth needs a new way to grip it. There are more ways to branch than any cedar pencil will ever find. So let's start from the beginning and unpack this together. It says sun and water are questions endlessly worth answering. In contrast to kind of our modern understanding or modern science, where the sun and water are understood or posited as things that we know, right? The breaking down of water into H2O, the tree posits these life forces and forms as questions, questions we must never stop asking, um, and never stop answering. What makes us human is our capacity to ask questions and to never stop asking questions about our surrounding environment. But again, this makes us think about the ways in which we have been enculturated or cultured to not ask questions about the world, right? To start to study sort of a hard science as if the world is fixed or it becomes an object in which we can manipulate or transform into a resource. It says a good answer must be reinvented many times from scratch. There is no singular answer. This perspective of the trees is that, again, in contrast to modern science, which kind of insists that every question has an answer, right? There are answer sheets, there are tests where there's right or wrong. Answers must be reinvented multiple times. And every place is going to develop its own answer, and every generation, or perhaps every day, every week, every month, is going to be reinvented new answers. But again, this is a more open way to engage with the earth. Every piece of earth needs a new way to grip it. There are more ways to branch than any cedar pencil will ever find. And what we begin to see is that Powers is playing with the metaphor of writing, of creating. There's new ways to engage with the earth. And the earth is more mysterious and more diverse and more open than ways that our exploring pencils will ever find. So every opportunity that we write papers or creatively or critically engage with the world, again, we'll never come up with the answer, but we'll come up with different forms of answers, answers and questions that help us think more deeply about our place in the world, and more than just think deeply, to feel deeply about the mysteries and diversity of the world. If you turn to page 4, I'm reading from the top now. That's the trouble with people, their root problem. Life runs alongside them, unseen, right here, right next, creating the soil, cycling water, trading in nutrients, making weather, building atmosphere, feeding and curing and sheltering more kinds of creatures than people know how to count. The trouble with people, our root problem, and notice the word root there. The first section of this book is entitled Roots, but our root problem, our fundamental problem, is that we don't see life. It runs alongside us, but it's unseen. The way we've structured our everyday lives, the way modernity structures life, is to not see the natural world. But Powers insists it's right here, right next. Notice the failure of language there, right? Right next. Um, right next to whom you would say this could be like a sentence fragment or incomplete. But it's we become displaced by nature, right? We're not the agents of the world. We're not the nouns. The greater world is, the greater environment, creating the soil, cycling water, trading in nutrients. But more specifically, of course, Powers is talking about trees, the ways we don't see trees, the trees that are creating life. Notice how the trees become an absent noun in this writing, right? It's not that the trees are creating the soil. Again, just like we don't see trees, the noun trees become invisible, creating soil, creating cycling water, feed and curing more kinds of creatures than people know how to count. Again, trees a source of sustenance and healing, and we don't even have the language to think about their diversity. To flip back to page 3, um, the previous page, there's a line, the third. to the last paragraph. The several hundred kinds of hawthorn laugh at the single name they're forced to share. Laurels insist that even death is nothing to lose sleep over. But the idea that the hawthorn trees are laughing, that we even have a name as if all hawthorn trees fall within the same category. Again, how inadequate our language is to describing nature, but not just inadequate. It's constructed in a way that we don't even see nature. We don't really even see trees except in the most reductive way, as if of hawthorn or elms. And again, these names mean nothing. They signify nothing. They fail to signify the complexity and the diversity of any species of tree. A chorus of living wood sings to the woman, if your mind were only a slightly greener thing, we'd drown you in meaning. What does this mean? I want everyone to write a one paragraph response. Again, just reflecting what they think this means. What does it mean that the trees are saying we drown you in meaning? Um, think about the verb drown. Think about the word meaning. What does it say about human language? Again, I'm not really grading these, but I want everyone to participate, and I want to make sure everyone can hear everything I'm saying and engage. And within the week, we're going to move this all online. Um, Thank you, and I look forward to reading everyone's responses.